Meeting of the Santa Barbara Fire and Police Commission is now called to order. May I ask the clerk to call roll?
Commissioner Herlinger,
Here.
Commissioner Hill,
Hill, here.
Vice Chair Dozer,
Here.
Chair Rodriguez.
Present. I'll let the minutes reflect that we are all present. Ms. Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair Rodriguez, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay. Ms. Clerk, do we have any cards for public comment on matters that are not on today's agenda?
We do not have public comment, or general comment.
Okay. And none online?
No.
Okay. Ms. Clerk, would you please read our first agenda item?
Item number 5, approval of minutes from July 27th, 2023.
Do we have any questions or requests for changes on the minutes? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for July 27th?
I'll move to approve them.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Press your button.
You did. You have to allow me to speak.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Clerk, would you read the next item on the agenda?
Item 6, Santa Barbara Police Department response to incidents involving people experiencing homelessness with behavioral health challenges.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Lieutenant Chris Payne. I presented this presentation through Santa Barbara Act a few months ago, and during that time, I was the supervisor in charge of the community action team. So I do have good background and knowledge, working knowledge of this particular topic. So to start the presentation, specifically, just before I start, is I want to make sure that this is in response to behavioral wealth in our community that's experiencing homelessness. Topics to be covered during the presentation is we're going to start with the department philosophy and policy, the specialized response that includes the community action team and co-response teams of the Santa Barbara Police Department, relevant training provided to the officers of the Santa Barbara Police Department, our current response model, relevant statistics, what we are seeing, and some anecdotal evidence of what we see in day-to-day activities and how they change, and an opportunity for questions. Starting with our department philosophy, I think one of the most important things that we emphasize at the Santa Barbara Police Department is the philosophy of equitable service. It doesn't matter whether you are experiencing homelessness or you live on the Riviera. The expectations is that as officers of this community that we provide the same service to everybody. We do provide that service in a manner of being procedurally just, and what I mean by that is we give the community an opportunity to have a voice. We remain neutral during those contacts. Provide everybody with respect, and try to build that public trust. When we're working with our community that's experiencing homelessness or our community that is experiencing mental health issues, we at the Santa Barbara Police Department want to look towards a best solution model. most of the time, in order to have that, it takes more time, takes more patience than placing a Band-Aid, but it does produce a better result in the long run for everybody in our community. So when looking at a best solution model, we really try and go outside of the normal activities of policing. We really have to include our community partners. So we work with SB Act, we work with County Be Well, and we try and include all of those services in our response to make sure that we're actually providing the best service to those individuals that we possibly can. That kind of covers the multidisciplinary approach as well, is it's not just a law enforcement response, it's a holistic response that provides for the wellness of those individuals and the awareness of our mental health impacts. Specifically, I just wanted to point out a couple things in our policy and in our response to individuals that are experiencing homelessness. We purposely put in our policy that we want to ensure that our personnel understand the needs and the rights of individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And then also, we specifically state in there that experiencing homelessness is not a crime, and members of the department will not use somebody's homelessness status solely as the basis for detention or law enforcement action. When it comes to mental illness and mental impairment, again, we state in our policy specifically for the officers to follow that the contacting officer should not provide, or excuse me, the contacting officer should provide a homeless individual with contact information for mental health assistance as appropriate. So the key policy points is that we recognize the impacts of mental health in our community and to the individual, that we recognize the need for a balanced approach that couples enforcement with resource providing, and also that homelessness and mental health issues are typically not criminal matters. And then lastly, we're resource focused as opposed to enforcement focused on these matters. How does the Santa Barbara Police Department respond to these activities? First of all is patrol. Patrol never takes a break. They're on 24/7, 365 days a year. They receive academy training, which is approximately 6 months long. Once they graduate from the academy, they go through 2 series of post-academy training. The first is a in-house additional 1-month training, and then after that, they go through the field training program, which is typically 3 6-week phases, so an additional 18 weeks of field training with a field training officer before they're released on their own. We do have 100% compliance for our crisis intervention training. All of our officers have attended the minimum or the 8-hour class, and the vast majority of them have had the opportunity to attend the 40-hour class as well. So I think that that's something to note, because it's rare for agencies to be 100% in compliance, especially because of staffing shortages and other needs of the community. So we do emphasize that training for our officers. Patrol also has the ability to contact internal and external resources for assistance, whether it be the mobile response through County Be Well or through some of the other community partners such as CityNet or SB Act. The specialized response that we provide to the community and in Santa Barbara is going to be through the co-response team. Currently, we have 1 officer assigned to the co-response team. We've just completed testing for a second co-response officer as well. So there should be 2 on the streets in the near future. Both of the co-response teams include 1 clinician provided through County Be Well and 1 officer through the Santa Barbara Police Department. We also have the community action team, which is the officers that primarily patrol on bikes and focus on the downtown, Milpas and waterfront corridors. We have 7-day-a-week coverage with those officers. There's a total of 4 officers and 1 supervisor working that unit. 2 officers work 1 half of the week, the other 2 officers work the other half of the week. Currently, both of those specialized response teams are mainly during the daytime hours. But I think with the addition of the second co-response, we will see more evening hours provided with a second co-response officer. Our current response model is kind of data-oriented. It's through crime statistics and community concerns that come in through dispatch or through other public comment. What those drive are our focus areas. So we get information through our regional action plan meetings, different hotspots and community concerns that are brought to our attention. Again, we use the multidisciplinary approach to those concerns. We're very partnership focused. Again, as I mentioned, our community partners are a huge help in our response to these types of issues. Law enforcement is typically the first individuals to be called to those types of issues, and being aware of the resources available to provide to subjects that are in, or individuals that are in need are super important. So working with SB Act, CityNet, Good Sam, Dignity Moves, all of those different community partners, as well as with our shelters, really helps us provide a different level of service that we see in probably other communities. And last but not least is we do realize that law enforcement is not always the best option. Because we get called there because nobody else knows who to call, doesn't necessarily mean that we have the resources, but being aware of what resources are available in town really helps us truly help those individuals that are in need. You are all very well aware of the mission strategies. I just want to highlight a couple of things that, especially under relationship building, we do have the co-response deployment as one of our mission strategies. And we also have them under service for our co-response and mental health assist to the community. On some statistics here, I wanted to point out, this is for the last 6 months from February to July, and this is specifically to the community action team only. This is not the entire patrol division or the entire department. But because the community action team primarily focuses on that street level activity, they tend to have the most interaction with individuals who are experiencing homelessness and individuals that are experiencing homelessness with mental health issues. And I've highlighted, there's a ton of numbers there, but I think the important thing to point out is if you look at the left-hand column of statistics, those are on-view calls. And what that means is those are calls for service that are generated by the officers themselves. They're patrolling, they see an activity, something catches their eye, which causes them to take some sort of, look into potential enforcement action. It typically gives them a reason to detain an individual and find out what the issue is. But out of those calls, only 35% of those calls are being cleared with an arrest, a cite, or a misdemeanor cite, so an actual enforcement action. The other 65% of those calls are leading to either some sort of assistance or a warning or education. If you look at the right-hand column, those are calls for service. Those are calls that are generated through the public. They come in through dispatch, and then the officers are dispatched to those calls. Out of those calls, only 11% of those calls are being cleared with an arrest, cite, or misdemeanor citation. So I think it really points to the fact that we're using a holistic approach to the community and trying to provide aid, and it's not just enforcement based. And then lastly, in the center there is recently we started, in February of this year, we started using the de-escalation flag. And what that means is we were able to use either some other form of intervention to prevent a use of force, and the CAT team and the co-response team have used that study flag 108 times in the last 6 months. Here's the heat map that signifies those calls for service. Again, it just kind of gives you a general idea of the areas of town that the community action team and co-response team focus in. We see a lot of calls in the downtown waterfront Milpas area specifically. We do have some calls for service up on the north end and a few on the Mesa. The next set of statistics there are homelessness-related calls for service. On the left-hand column, we have department-wide, so it's approximately 19%. And in the right-hand column, you have specifically the community action team, and they're at about 37%. Now, with these numbers, I do want to kind of provide a clarifying comment that they're going to be reasonably accurate, but they're probably going to be slightly off. And the reason that I say that is in the next slide here, anytime that we do data tracking or statistics tracking, it's always data in, data out. It's what we can actually get in there, and then what we have in there is what we're able to evaluate. And we evaluate those calls for service by using study flags. And study flags are a way for an officer to notate what the call was based on. So essentially there's domestic violence, narcotic related, alcohol related, homelessness related, mental health related. There's multiple different study flags that an officer has an option to choose from, and one of them is actually the de-escalation flag. But they can only enter 2 flags when they go to clear the call. And so we prioritize de-escalation, we prioritize domestic violence. There's a few of them that have a higher priority that if they're involved in the call, we must input. So it may leave out some of it. So if there happened to be, say, a domestic violence call that included de-escalation but also had a mental health component, the mental health component or a homelessness component may not be captured in that study flag because we only have 2 options to include when we clear that call. The other part of it is clearing over the radio versus clearing over the computer. The officers obviously on the bicycle typically clear over the radio, and so when you're clearing over channel 1 or our main channel, you want to be brief about your communication so it's open for emergency traffic. And so sometimes they don't always clear with the study flags because it no longer makes it brief. What are we seeing in terms of anecdotal evidence? I've been with the police department for full-time for over 19 years, and mental health related issues are on the rise. And I think part of it is probably due to, as a society, we now recognize that mental health issues are important and that they needed to be addressed. And so I think because of the community awareness, we're seeing a little bit more of it than before it just went unreported. Substance abuse and addiction, it tends to go hand in hand, unfortunately, with mental illness. Most people, well, let me rephrase that. It's not uncommon that we come across individuals who are experiencing homelessness that have mental health issues, who are also substance abusers, whether it be alcohol or narcotics. And when you have somebody who is dual diagnosis, where they have a mental health related issue and then coupled with a substance abuse problem, it tends to exacerbate the issue, but typically they're trying to self-medicate themselves with their own issues, but it makes it difficult to provide assistance to those individuals. That tends to make them service resistant. There's also individuals that are okay with how they are and they don't want any help. When we do have the opportunity to help them, we take advantage of it, but sometimes they truly have to wait till they want help so we can actually provide it. The other challenges are when somebody does want help is what resources do we have available at that exact moment. We, as the city of Santa Barbara, we actually retain beds at PATH for that particular reason. But surprisingly, and I'm actually excited about it, is that we actually fill them quite regular. It's very rare that we have empty beds. So people are using the resources when we have them, but we only have 8 beds at this point in time to use. that concludes my presentation. Is there any questions I can try and answer?
Do either of my colleagues have any questions for staff? Thank you. Commissioner Hill?
Yes, thank you. That was extremely helpful. And unfortunately, I didn't understand everything that was on Andy's charts. But I had.
Thank you. I was tremendously influenced by my ride along with the police department. The officer who was carrying out her duties was excellent. And one of the things that I saw happen continuously, there would be a call for service. The first was someone who appeared to be walking aimlessly and not clear about whether he was in the street or out of the street. And so she arrived on the scene. He was Latino. He could not speak English. She could not speak Spanish. But quickly, a second officer arrived who could supply that. And what I found was I think an MO, quite frankly, was the suggestion that with that particular person, he was reoriented to where he supposedly was going. He was found passed out on the street in the opposite direction about 40 minutes later, revived, and the question was, do you want me to call an ambulance and have him take you to the hospital where you'll get some food and some care, or do you want me to place you under arrest? And that was a question that was asked of a number of people who were intoxicated, unable to stand, or were just basically passed out, slumping against walls, and she would come to their aid. And it was a continual suggestion to prioritize having them picked up by the ambulance and taken to Cottage rather than to the booking. And number one, it seemed to me like a sensible solution. And also she pointed out that it conserved her resources because she had to take them to the booking if she arrested them, and that took her off the streets. So I'm wondering, is that a policy of the police department to prioritize encouraging people who appear to be in need of that kind of assistance to go to Cottage Hospital? And how does that work with the ambulance service in those circumstances?
Chair Rodriguez, or Commissioner Hill through Chair Rodriguez, to try and answer your question is officers are provided discretion on how they handle most misdemeanor crimes. And with that, part of working in a specific area, you begin to learn those individuals and understand maybe what might be a little bit better for them. So it's not necessarily, I think, a direct policy, but in terms of we encourage officers to use discretion, again, to look for the long-term outcome and not the short-term Band-Aid.
Yeah, it sounded like a good approach. And yes, she did know most of these people that she was encountering on a first-name basis, because they were routinely in that particular area of her patrol. So it makes a lot of sense. But it is a resource allocation that I don't know what the consequences are. Who picks up the tab from the ambulance service that takes them to the hospital at a rate of somewhere around $2,500?
I just want to kind of give a little more context.
Okay.
So we're not here to criminalize those types of crimes. When someone is drunk in public and cannot care for themselves, they're not getting help if they're going to jail.
Right.
So there's all sorts of costs either way. And where those costs end up, we could probably spend a healthy amount of time debating. Even if we take them to the sobering center, which we do, most of them have to go to Cottage to get treatment first, because they won't take them at the sobering center when they're that intoxicated and they need care. Our officers learn them by name, and to Lieutenant Payne's point, know what they need, right? That they're not a danger to the community. They're more in need of help, right? They're not committing a dangerous crime. You know, they could end up being the victim, or they could end up getting hit because of their, so it's looking for a long-term solution. And that's not just now spending 5 hours booking someone into county jail and allocating all those resources and the court's resources for someone who's drunk. So it's all about finding a solution and trying to, you know, in the kindest and most empathetic way we can, talk them into the resources that they really need. You know, we don't want to just leave them, so sometimes we have to take them to jail. But ultimately, what you saw is what we want our officers to do. We don't want them just to place handcuffs on them and to take them to jail. We want them to get resources. And even if we do it over and over, that's okay, because we want them to get help. That's what we talk about, because eventually we're going to build trust with them, and hopefully they're going to ask for services and a bed, and we're going to be able to get that for them. But I don't ask my officers to make decisions. We don't ask our officers to make decisions based on cost. We ask our officers to make decisions based on what is in the best interest of the individual in the community. And that's really the way we have to approach this, which is why you see, you know, the numbers and the alternatives, and when we, you know, talk in terms of county discussions about not incarcerating those individuals that don't need to be incarcerated for these types of quote-unquote crimes that, you know, there are other alternatives for. It is resource-based and it is time-intensive, but it also speaks to the great level of compassion and empathy that the officers have and how they're working, because they know these folks by name.
And please understand, I was not suggesting this as a criticism. I was
No,
suggesting it as
absolutely.
a far superior way of being able to approach a real problem.
Absolutely, and I just want to
They
make
could not be
sure,
left on the street because they were not capable of protecting
Yes.
themselves.
and we just want to make sure that we're providing that service. And I want to make sure we acknowledge and give credit to the officers that, because I think there is a perception that we don't always view things in this way, but I will tell you, more times than not, this is, and, you know, as you experience the way in which our officers view these situations.
It did seem, and this is from my one unique slice of, you know, one day in the car, that was a major component of what the officer whose patrol was the east side of State Street in the evening was faced with.
Yes, and you can see by the heat map on the calls for service, yes. So some officers see it way more than others just because of the areas that they work.
And Commissioner Hill, I wanted to add too, depending on the day of the week and the time of the day, right? So there's more resources available during the day than there are in the evenings and during the weekdays versus the weekends, right?
Right,
So
and this was a weekend
Yeah.
evening, which is
Each-
going to be a hot spot for a fewer number of
Exactly.
people.
And each patrol officer has to essentially triage and use their discretion based on knowing that those are the circumstances. So we have path available beds, sometimes in the evenings and the weekends. If someone's able to intake them, we have outreach teams that are out during the day and during the weekends, but only until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, right? And that's new. So we're able to resource them depending on their state, right? Their condition, their level of intoxication, their level of openness and receptivity to services. And constantly the patrol officers are communicating that and communicating it to the appropriate organizations and partners to be able to, again, be able to address the need in the way that we best can do so during that time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herlinger?
Well, I like Commissioner Hill, got most of the numbers. But I just want to, is it a fair takeaway that 19% of the calls for service involve homelessness?
Go back to that slide real quick. So again, for the last 6 months, I would, to be honest with you, sir, I believe that it's slightly higher than that, but not terribly much higher.
Okay.
It's probably less than, it's probably at the 25% or less.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dozer?
Thank you, Lieutenant Payne. That was a great presentation. My question revolves around the co-response teams. You have one, and it sounds like you are in the midst of having a second one. These teams are so crucial, and they do such great things. Is there any possibility that any more will be added? Is that a pipe dream?
Going to make a donation?
Wishful thinking?
Yes, it's certainly our desire to have more, but it takes a combination of resources. It's not just the resources of the Santa Barbara Police Department, but it's also the resources that we can obtain through County BWell. And Chief Gordon worked extensively to help us get this second co-response team up and running and getting these resources through County BWell. So I think we should certainly be proud that we now have a second team for 19.2 or 19.5 square miles roughly is where the county has 4 teams for county-wide. So geographically, I think we're ahead of the game, but we would love to have more teams. But I wouldn't expect one soon.
Fair enough.
Commissioner Hill?
Just a follow-up question. Do each of those teams have someone who speaks Spanish on them?
One does for sure, but I think actually both will, because either the officer or the clinician speaks Spanish, so.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that informative presentation. So I've been part of the SB Act Collaborative Partnership, representing businesses, business operators in the West Beach area specific to the impacts of homelessness. And I have to say firsthand that I continue to be impressed with SBPD's response and representation. I found them to be very responsive to concerns, compassionate in how they respond, and actively part of finding solutions to the root causes of homelessness and the impacts of homelessness on businesses and residents. So you listed, so thank you for that. And thank you, Chief, for working hard on that second co-response. So you listed a challenge as being if folks want help and then available resources. What kind of support do you need from the commission or the community in order to more effectively do this part of your job?
I think one of the biggest needs that we have is additional short-term housing. The city, in conjunction with the county and through other resources, we've worked on a different set of, basically like a 3-tier housing setup to where we need short-term immediate housing when somebody's willing to accept those resources, somewhere to get them to right then and there, and then find a way to transition them into a kind of a midterm, so a 3-month to 1 year program, and then eventually try and transition them into permanent housing. But that immediate housing need is probably the largest need that we have.
Thank you. I think everyone will agree that that's a big need. Is restorative policing or restorative court still active?
No, ma'am. Right now, due to staffing reasons a couple of years ago, we opted to transition the restorative officer into co-response, and was the resource transition.
And could you explain or help the public understand the difference between community action team and co-response?
The main difference between community action team and the co-response teams are that the community action team is out typically in the streets, and they're conducting low-level enforcement, and they're actually contacting individuals in camps and that type of environment, is where co-response is specifically geared towards mental health and more specifically towards individuals that are in crisis. So these are individuals that either recognize that they have a mental health issue and either their medications aren't helping them, they're not feeling well, or even to the point, typically the extremes that we see are individuals that are now contemplating suicide or harming others. And that's where the co-response team is geared toward, is trying to get help to those individuals that are in crisis.
I just have a couple more questions. Thank you for that. You're good. Ms. Anderson, you might be able to answer this one better. Can you help the public understand how many contacts are typical in order for someone to be willing or comfortable accepting services?
Chair Rodriguez, thank you for that question. And there is a significant range. So we can have individuals that are new to the city of Santa Barbara and very open. They're trying to connect or reconnect with family or friends from another area. And actually, the CAT team helps facilitate some of those reunifications along with some of our service providers, so it can be a short number of interactions. But for the most part, the city of Santa Barbara is unique in that we have a high percentage of individuals who are experiencing chronic homelessness. So they've been living on the streets, experiencing trauma, self-medicating to that trauma, and it can take up to 42 different interactions across service providers, with law enforcement and beyond, for them to even accept case management and us to be able to take identifying information to help them, again, identify what their short-term and long-term needs are.
And I think that speaks to the importance and effectiveness of that kind of response that you were speaking to, Commissioner Hill. My last question, and it doesn't have to be a long or big answer, but I'm wondering, Chief, you come from a jurisdiction that had 5150 authority. Can you speak on how that was effective and what we might be missing here in Santa Barbara?
So I'm actually going to make it a very short answer. Dr. Navarro and I have been talking, and we're getting very close to coming up with some sort of pilot program for us here at SPPD to do a pilot program on having officers place holds. So it is very valuable. It has to be done right, and it hasn't been done in the county, with the exception of they have a pilot program now for the sheriff's department. I think, you know, the biggest thing is change is hard and different when you've done something the same way. It just makes people uncomfortable. I think there's a perception that officers will just immediately put someone on a hold and we won't have the resources to address their needs. And I understand those concerns, but my experience has been over the course of being able to write holds and writing holds myself for the entirety of my career, that officers are very judicious about how they use that. And it is for those that are in crisis and need help, and to make sure they get resources as quickly as possible. Because at, 2 a.m. when you go, because this is not just about those that are experiencing homelessness, but even those that are in residence and homes and that are having that mental health crisis, that you can make sure that they get the resources they need and get transported and treated. So I think we're on a very good path in working with the county to be able to pilot a program and to actually be able to write holds here in the city.
Thank you. And just for clarification, Dr. Navarro is with Behavioral Wellness?
Yes.
Okay. I personally appreciate the department's philosophy on understanding that homelessness is not a crime, and your efforts to and your commitment to serving our homeless equally, as equal as the rest of our community. Commissioner Hill.
Yes, this is a follow-up and pretty superficial question, but we have people being taken to Cottage Hospital in many instances because they are experiencing substance abuse and are a danger to themselves or others on the street. What happens next when they go to Cottage? What's the follow-up from that point forward? And is that from the police department or some other service, or?
So that's not from the police department. Cottage Hospital works with all different service providers as well and has social workers in the hospital. So I don't want to speak to what their process is, but that's not the police department.
Okay, that helps. So that leaves me with a question. I can talk at the end of this thing about where we might want to explore the full range of the path, because these folks wind up back on the street.
And that's
Many
actually
instances.
part of the ongoing conversation, and Ms. Anderson can also speak to this. This is why we do things called RAP and the South County Collaborative, so that we are talking about, because all of us typically have the same individuals that we come in contact with. So there are a lot of those efforts to make sure that we're not redundantly doing the same thing. So there's a lot of communication that goes on amongst all the different service partners to make sure that these individuals are getting services long-term and that, long-term solution. So we just tried to give the overview and the highlights, but there is a lot of other work that happens. And like I said, there's a South County Collaborative that has now started and some other things to make sure there's systems in place, that how medical information is shared with those that are allowed to have it, to make sure that all of those things are in fact addressed. So.
Thank
And
you.
Commissioner Hill, I'm happy to address that too offline, and we have talked about going in depth more in homelessness in terms of our collaborative work and how service providers engage or often don't engage with each other. We still have gaps in the system of care. But cottage isn't the only pathway, but when it is, the individual has to be open and receptive to the options that are being offered to them, right? So they're offered treatment, they're offered therapies, they're offered a level of care from cottage, but often the gap is that they're not receptive and they do return to the streets as a result.
And I'd encourage commissioners or any member of the public to reach out to sbact.org and attend one of the regional action plan meetings. They take place over Zoom, so they're quite accessible. And then we are fortunate to have Barbara Anderson, who is our local homeless expert. So please get involved. This is one of the city council's priorities, and with calls for service at 19% for the full department and 37% for the community action team, it's clearly an important community topic. Any other questions from the commission? Do we have any members of the public present or online that would like to speak?
Chair Rodriguez, we do not have any in-person comments, and we have one remote public comment.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Rodriguez, members of the commission. My name is Landon Rank. I'm the Associate Director with SBACT. I just wanted to share my appreciation for our local police department and especially the community action team and our co-response unit. I've seen firsthand just how responsive they are, and not just responsive, but compassionate and understanding of the issues with Kane, Commander Katsapis, and others. Getting to do neighborhood walks. They engage with individuals compassionately by name, and then getting to work with them in the RAPs, just seeing how responsive they are to community concerns as they come up, that it's always we'll send someone over there today, we'll take care of it. So I want to continue echoing support for more co-response. The more we can do, the better. It saves lives. And echo what Chair Rodriguez said, we really invite members of the community to come out to the RAP meetings. You can get more info, sbact.org/RAPs, but it's a great way to connect not just with service providers, but also with law enforcement and the others who are involved in these issues. So again, just expressing my gratefulness, and yeah, thank you for hosting this today.
There are no other comments or public comments. There's no action item for this agenda item, so Ms. Clerk, would you please read? Thank you so much. Would you please read the next agenda item?
Item number 7, Santa Barbara Police Department Mission Strategies Report.
Good afternoon. I'm Assistant Chief Mary Linda Arroyo, and I'm just going to here to give you the Q2, April through June, statistics on our mission strategies and where we're at. And last time I had spoken, we are moving to a dashboard. We don't have it quite live yet for the public and for everyone, but we're very close. My hope is that in the next 60 to 90 days, we'll have that up, and that you will be able to actually pull this material as you would like to look at it. So as a reminder, our mission strategies, we have added a few items to our mission strategies in felt presence. We've added our volunteers in policing and how many hours they give, because that is directly correlated to our felt presence. We've also added our aerial support, our drones, if we have a deployment of that, particularly in tactical situations or otherwise. And we've also added our criminal investigations that are closed and the follow-ups that our detectives do in the service area. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the dashboard and what it will look like. This is a picture of our reduce harm dashboard. What it is it's a totality to give you an idea of the entirety of our reduced harm activities during a given period of time. We can drill it down to the various different patrol teams or the various different augmentation teams that we have, what type of reduced harm events they are. And on the top right-hand side, you'll see the on-view calls for service is the largest item you see. The font size changes with how many of those events that item is. So the larger the font, the more of those events are that type. And obviously, on-view calls for service are always going to be a predominant amount of our reduced harm. It also gives you a visualization of across the map of where all of those reduced harm events are going and what types they are. Gives you a 9-month trend to show if we're up or down on any given month. And this is a 1-month view for July of 2023, I believe, or yes, I believe 1 month. This is the felt presence. To show you a difference, felt presence has 685 events during that same time. And you can see that the prem checks and VIP deployment total hours are a significant portion of that felt presence. And again, we can drill down to the specific teams, patrol teams, or traffic, or our CAT team, or the canine officers, so on and so forth. And then we can always drill in to actually see what that call for service is or what that event is. Again, I hope to have this in the next 60 to 90 days. And it would be public, some of it will be public facing, so the public can actually look and see different things. So that's our hope. So now I'll get into our last quarter. So again, looking at our on-view, 24% of the time when the officers do an on-view stop, they are making an arrest or creating a citation. 40% of the time we're writing traffic citations, and 10% of our arrests for DUI are for felony DUI. We had 38 Narcan deployments over this quarter. And for this quarter compared to last year's Q2, we are 20% less in violent crimes and 35% less in property crimes. This year, we've made a few less felony and misdemeanor arrests, but we've had more traffic citations and more field interviews. Relationship building, quality of life. We absolutely love doing the Coffee with the Cops and all of the different interactions, and we were over on San Andreas Street during this time and had at least 40 or 50 people come by. It was great. The picture is our community academy, the graduation during this Q2. 26 community contacts or presentations and outreach. We had 73 co-response restorative calls for service. We did have 1 month where our restorative officer or co-response officer was unavailable. So that's a little less than what we'd have normally. The other officers did pick that up, but this is specific just to the co-response officer. Obviously now we're moving to the 2. And 7,284 parking citations. And our wonderful volunteers in the picture. And total hours for our volunteers up to this point is over 1,000 hours, which I think is very significant. 14 directed patrols where we've sent officers out, directed them to various different focus areas, which are large denominations within the city of Santa Barbara, and then premise checks, an actual location where we've asked them to do a premise check of a specific address. So that's again over this last quarter. And some bread and butter statistics. We are still significantly lower than our target for all of our priority calls for service response times, which is always nice to see. I've added the active cases investigated. Our detective investigators have done 340 active case investigations during this quarter, encompassing over 1,691 follow-up investigations. 226 traffic collisions, the CSI, total reports is over 3,500, and our total calls for service during this quarter is just over 15,000. That's it.
Thank you. Do we have questions from commissioners? Commissioner Herlinger?
We just need a two-sentence definition of felt presence.
Exactly what you would think it is. Officers, when you see them, you feel their presence, you see the car, you see officers walking, you see our volunteers in policing, and you feel that you have a connection to the law enforcement or to public safety, and it makes you that there's felt presence of public safety.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? I have a couple. Thank you for that report. So the 20% reduction in violent crimes and 35 in property crimes is pretty impressive. Do you have an idea of why that reduction occurred?
Well, I'd love to say because we have the best police department in the world, but, crime is something that we do our best to reduce that harm. That's why we've used that term. So I'm sure it's a culmination of things with all of our community partners, all the wonderful people that we have in our community that see something, say something, and it can't be underplayed, that felt presence and being part of the community at every chance we get. That sometimes enables people to go, you know what, I'm just not going to do that, or I have another avenue, or I have another opportunity. Our PAL program is a great example of that. So I think it's all the things that our police department, our officers, our professional staff, and our community partners, and the entire city and every department does. So it's not just us. I'd say it's our community, and that shows that we have a very, very responsive community.
Great. And can you describe, you did last quarter, but I think it's helpful for the public to know what P1 and through P4 calls are, what qualifies as such?
Yes, so priority 1 is emergency life and death. Exactly what you would think it is. Priority 2 is urgent, may become a priority 1, but it's urgent, we need to get there as quickly as we can, but not with lights and sirens. Priority 3 is more of a cold call, we need to get there, but it is not as urgent as a priority 2, and priority 4 is just a report call where there is no crime occurring, somebody needs our services to make a report or to ask for further assistance from public safety.
Thank you. And then with full disclosure, my partner is a volunteer in police, so I know what the VIP program is, but could you explain that for the public?
Yes, well, first of all, we're always taking new VIPs, so anybody who wants to come and volunteer, we'd love to have you. They're just wonderful human beings, wonderful part of our community, and they just want to give back. And they come in, they wear the gray shirts, they greet people in our lobby and help them navigate where they needed to go in our lobby. They walk around on State Street, and on Milpas Street, and on the Upper Side, and on San Andreas Street, and they answer questions for people. They're our ambassadors for anybody and everybody. They're also our eyes and ears, and they let us know if there's something they see that we can react to or help with. They help our community partners and our other city departments. They go on the rap walks. They're just there to help, and that's the great thing. And they help inside the department. They're great for morale. They're all just wonderful people. And again, it's another establishment showing that public safety, it's the community and the public safety are all one.
So big thank you to our volunteer and policing volunteers. So not including the dashboard that you mentioned, because you said that that's about 30 to 90 days out, where can the public find this presentation?
Well, we can definitely post it on our website, and through, obviously, this venue, that's always posted, so they can absolutely see that through this venue. Our hopes are, again, is as we get that dashboard, that we have a public-facing dashboard, so that any time of the day or night, they can actually kind of look at it and ask questions. We also have our community crime map, which is live, which can be seen by anyone, and actually tracks a lot of these different things that they can already look at geographically.
And the community crime map is on the SBPD website?
It's on the City of Santa Barbara website and the SBPD website, and if you just Googled Santa Barbara Community Crime Map, you would get it and be able to go to it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Do we have anybody from the public in person or online that would like to speak?
Chair Rodriguez, we do not have any in-person or remote public comments.
Fantastic. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, an informative presentation. Ms. Clerk, can you read the next item on the agenda?
Item number 8, Santa Barbara Fire Department Incident Report data.
I have to follow that PowerPoint. Okay, we'll do our best. Good afternoon, Fire and Police Commission. Chris Mail is your fire chief. To my left is Operations Division Chief Brian Fetterman. I will handle the incident reporting data, and then Chief Fetterman is going to talk about your next item, which is the fire department's evaluative process. Today's discussion, we're building upon previous discussions so that at some point we'll have everyone up to speed to be able to look at what will become a dashboard and show our response times, our what's called our total response times, which we'll get into. So this will be just a little bit of review for a couple of minutes. But when we get into the meat and potatoes of it, we're going to talk about the first 2 quarters of 2023. And we're going to be looking at turnout time and travel time, which we'll get into what is turnout time, what is travel time. Then we're going to look at the first 2 quarters call volume, and we'll look at the call types year to date. I will apologize that we're trying to put a ton of information on the screen, so it'll be a little bit tough to see. I had the luck of being able to write the numbers a little bigger before the presentation, so at least I'll be able to hit the highlights. This is a review from last time. Where do we get the data? Our dispatch, computer-aided dispatch, which is CAD, automatically downloads response times actually in real time to our internal, what's called RMS, our records management system, which is called ImageTrend. So let me just begin by kind of painting a picture for you. So the engine company gets a medical emergency. En route to the call, the firefighter in the back can pull up the ImageTrend medical report and can hit download response times. And the response times that have come through to that second are sitting in front of him or her, and they can actually start building the report before they even get on scene. And then when they get on scene, it uploads their on-scene time, it uploads patient contact time, all that kind of stuff. So these tools, these reports can be used in real time, but what I like to tell people is documentation should never get in the way of patient care or handling the emergency. So what I like to tell the community is the more serious the call, the less documentation is occurring at the scene. But if it's a relatively minor incident, our folks are really doing the reports while still at the scene. So the CAD downloads to ImageTrend, and then we have 2 different reports that we fill out. One is called NFIRS, which is the National Fire Incident Reporting System. That's for the actual incident that we go on, the basics of the incident, whether it's a tree down or a house fire. It is a public document. The public can actually retrieve a copy. We do ask them, what's it for, that kind of thing, but the public can actually get a copy of the NFIRS report. If it's a medical emergency, there's also an EPCR that's done. That's Electronic Patient Care Report. And that's what I was describing when I said that the firefighter on the way to the call might begin to download the times, the dispatch information. In other words, what were we sent out for? A heart attack, a traffic accident, what have you. And then, just so you know, ImageTrend is used countywide, and on the patient care side, there is, and I mentioned this last time, the fire department begins filling out their report, and then when the ambulance shows up, they use the same reporting system, and they literally just hit a button, and they link the reports together. So they're linked electronically. So now, when the patient goes to the hospital, the emergency physician or nurse can pull up the ImageTrend report and look back to the first blood pressure that the fire department took, or what was the narrative of the fire department at the scene, what was the situation with the accident, things like that. So it's a really complex system, but it works really well, and it ties in with the hospital electronic reporting also. So as I said, ImageTrend is actually used countywide for all the fire agencies. So this is a repeat slide from last time. National Fire Protection Administration, they are kind of the watchdog, the overseer of all things fire in the United States. NFPA 1221 specifically looks at radio communication systems. And they set standards for different types of response, different agencies. In other words, rural versus urban, which is what we're in. And NFPA recommends about a 6-minute response time. So what does that consist of? And that is what's called total response time. It includes, for us, we try to shoot for 60 seconds of call processing time. So from the time the 911 line rings, the police fire communications dispatcher picks up 911, interrogates the call, 60 seconds until the station alerting is going off. Then once the station alerting happens, the lights come on, the dispatch is voiced. The firefighters have about 60 seconds. We shoot for 60 seconds for them to get in the apparatus until wheels are rolling. That's what's called turnout time. They also call it reflex time. And then travel time is just that. Wheels are rolling. That's travel time. So again, total response time is from 911 pickup through the interrogation to the station alerting. Last time I played the automated alerting system that we use. It is unbelievably fast. The dispatcher gets the address, the call type, and what apparatus handles the call, and in one click, the entire station is alerted, it's voiced, and the firefighters are on their way. It has shortened our overall response times. So again, call processing time, turnout time, travel time, and once you get on scene and wheels are stopped, that is what is called total response time. How is that done? So we talked about how dispatch puts the call out. The firefighters get the call, they get into the fire engine, and they use what are called their mobile data computers. We use iPads. So by the time they get to the engine, they have the call type on the iPad, and there's a button that they just put ER. That means en route. So that's when turnout time is stopped, and now they are in travel time. And when they arrive on the scene, they put OS. Now, that's only as good as the situation, in a sense that, you know, maybe they pull out of the station and they've got people on the front ramp yelling that the house next door is on fire, and you know, sometimes they don't always hit en route at the same time. Occasionally they'll push the button, but it doesn't go through and give them an on-scene time. So what I'm building upon is there's some outliers that we have that, you know, I mean, I've pulled up reports that shows 800 seconds. It told them, you know, was turnout time of 800 seconds. Okay, something went wrong there. That's an outlier. So, but we try to drill down to the averages. So, so what I'd like to do is look at Q1. So the police department has 4 priorities. We actually use largely 2 types of response. One is a code 3 response, that's red lights and siren. That would be equivalent to a police department priority 1 call, life-threatening. And we also have code 2 responses, and that means that we travel just like the person, you know, like you would travel down the road. We need to get there quickly, but we don't travel with red lights and siren. So what this is looking at, just to get the best idea of response times, we're looking at Q1, so January through March. We're looking at code 3 calls. Now, more specifically, we're looking at code 3 medical calls, rescue or EMS. Why are we looking at that? Because these represent probably our best response times, in a sense that the firefighters can travel like Brian and I are dressed right now. Okay, the call comes out, we are in our uniform, we get on the fire engine and we respond to the call. That's a medical call, we do that. Now during COVID, if you remember me chatting with you during COVID, our folks were donning all of their personal protective equipment, goggles, Tyvek jacket, et cetera, before they even got in the engine. Now we're back to normal response. And the reason why we look at Code 3 medical is because fire response is going to have a little bit of a different turnout time. When and if you've been able to go on a ride-along or seen firefighters, they have to get out of this clothing and into their turnouts. So that does represent a few second delay, 20, 30-second delay. They usually get their pants on, then en route, they're getting their jacket on over the seat belt, and I mean, it's, you know, and all this stuff is happening while they're driving, but turnout time is a little extended when they're putting on turnouts. And they're putting on turnouts for traffic accidents, for any type of fire, any hazardous condition, things like that. So we're really looking at medical response, which is pretty good. So it's broken down by the quarter again, and it's actually broken down by station and by shift. But really, I'll just get you to the very bottom, and that's one of the issues with our data that I kind of have a problem with. Our average turnout time in Q1 was 77 seconds. So once again, I caution statistics, of course, we can look at anything. That's an average. But again, it's dependent on the captain pushing the en route button. So if that happens right before they drive out of the station, okay, great. But if it happens a half a block down the road, it's going to extend that turnout time a little bit. So it's one of my problems with the statistics is the turnout time is in seconds and the travel time is in minutes. So you're looking at just north of 1 minute travel time or turnout time and just north of 4 minutes of travel or turnout time and travel time. So just over a minute turnout time, just over 4 minutes of travel time. So Q2, again, right to the bottom, and I wish I had don't have my laser pointer, but if you look at the bottom two numbers, they're tough to see. A little bit of change, about 2-second increase in turnout time, 79.65, but you'll see actually that travel time went down to under 4 minutes. So that's very common in statistics over a large period of time like this, over 3 months. You'll see turnout time go up a little bit, but you'll see response time go down a little bit. That's fairly normal. Okay, thank you. All right, so what happened at the fire department, Q1? So the fire department responded to 2,727 incidents the first quarter of 2023, and that averages to about 30 per day. So several sessions ago when I gave an orientation to the fire department, I talked about how we have 8 stations, but really the majority of the calls are run by 6 stations. The station up on the Riviera runs under 300 calls a year. And thankfully, I always say thankfully, the station at the airport runs around 50 calls a year. So every time I'm flying out of Santa Barbara Airport, I think of that statistic and I'm good to go. So really about 6 of our stations are running about 29 to 30 calls a day. So do the math, averaging 5 calls a day or so. Now, those of you that went on a ride along, Station 1 is definitely busier than the other stations, but 3 to 5 calls a day is fairly normal. What this does show is emergency response. So 2,222 calls were emergency response. 304 were emergency downgraded to non-emergency. Okay, let me give you an example of that. Engine company is dispatched to an injury traffic accident. They roll out the door, red lights and siren. En route, dispatch gets another call and they say, no, nobody's hurt, but there's a big radiator leak and there's radiator fluid running down the gutter. Okay, so now we have confirmation that it is a non-injury traffic accident with a hazardous condition. That would be a downgraded response. They would shut off their red lights and siren, but they would continue to go to the incident. 186 were non-emergency responses. Again, those are code 2, hazard calls, elder assist, a tree branch has fallen into a road, something like that. And then very few are non-emergency upgraded to emergency. And I think we could take that accident example that I just gave and flip it around. and say, hey, nobody's hurt, but there's a radiator leak, and then the next person calls and says, oh, no, we got somebody really hurt. That would be an upgraded response. So that doesn't happen that often. Quarter two, call volume, very, very similar. Really sitting at within 50 calls or so. Again, about 31 calls a day average. We really have been sticking it around that same statistic over the last 6, 8 months, a year or so. I mentioned to the commission that we did see a significant decrease in call volume during COVID, but our numbers have popped back up to somewhat normal. So this is fairly typical. All right, this slide is tough to see, and I wish that I could have cut it down, but what I'd like to do is have you look at the left-hand column. It includes the section that's in white. And these are our general call types. Number 1 is fire. Number 2 is overpressure, rupture, explosion, overheat, no fire. So that could be, let's say, someone's oven that won't turn off. Let's say it's a propane tank that's venting. I would tell you that an explosion, this is where statistics get a little skewed. An explosion in the city of Santa Barbara is going to be a full fire response. I think we saw in the news what happened in Santa Maria yesterday. So they had an entire house explode in the middle of the day. That's a significant response. Section 3 are all of your EMS calls. Section 4 are your hazardous condition calls. 5 are service calls. Again, it might be assisting an elderly person. It might be shutting off a pipe that's running, that kind of thing. We go on a lot of what we call good intent calls. That might be someone thinks there's a problem, and we go out to investigate, and we don't find a problem. So it was a good intent, but we didn't find anything. And then the last are false calls and false alarms. If we move all the way over to the right column, it's a little bit shocking to see, but according to this data, 1.85% of our calls are fires. But I want to give a little bit more information on that. That means actual fire upon firefighters' arrival, where they had to pull a hose off of the fire truck and put the fire out. Okay? That's a fire. Your next column, you're down on number 4, your hazardous conditions. We go to a lot of things that if we didn't respond would turn into a fire. Okay? Arcing power lines in a tree with arcing, electrical arcing that's falling down and landing in the brush. Okay? That's a hazardous condition. It's not a fire, but we know very quickly that it could turn into a fire. So, again, if you just go down, you'll see that, we approach 100%, but we're looking at about 65% of our calls are medical in nature. So that's fairly common for a municipal or local government fire department. That's statistically valid really across most departments or a lot of departments in the country. We're not drilling down to a station. There are stations in some jurisdictions that run 90+% medical calls in their jurisdiction. We're not even going to drill down that far in the city. We're just looking at aggregately across the city's nearly 12,000 calls. 60-something percent, 65% are medical. One thing I do want to say before we finish is keep in mind these are incidents. These aren't what are called unit movements. Okay, so if I say there's 2,700 calls, a lot of those calls may involve multiple units responding. Example, structure fire, 3 fire engines, ladder truck, battalion chief. That's 5 units responding attached to one incident. So when you go, oh, only 2,700 times were fire trucks rolling across town. No, not at all. No, there are unit movements are much higher than that. Okay. And again, just on behalf of all of us, it's just a little orientation. Chief Arroyo is going to do my PowerPoint next month for me, as if she's not busy enough. But happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Are there questions from the commission? Commissioner Hill?
This is a very general question, but under the assumption that, using the example that's in the website, there's a 911 call comes in, someone has fallen and is unconscious in the city, first responder is to the fire department?
Commissioner Hill, that is correct. So if someone, there's a couple of caveats to that, but let's assume that the cell phone routing is correct. Let's assume that the call is electronically goes to the right dispatch center. If someone is in the city of Santa Barbara, falls and is unconscious, that call should go to the Santa Barbara Police Department Dispatch Center. They provide what's called emergency medical dispatch. They interrogate the call. They get a level of what's called a launch determinant, and that actually sets the level of priority within the system. So it could be a code 3 or code 2 response. And then the fire department is dispatched. At the same time, one of the other dispatchers is contacting the county and making sure that AMR, who's our private provider right now, is dispatched. There'll be a few second delay on that, but really when the medical call comes in, the dispatcher's interrogating the call, the other dispatchers are hearing it, you know, oh, she's fallen and she's unconscious, using your example. One of the other dispatchers is going to, you know, get to the county and say, hi, we need a code 3 ambulance at, you know, State and De La Guerra for an unconscious fall victim.
So does the fire department transport people to the hospital, or is a first responder assessing the system, doing what can be done, and then it's being transported by AMR?
That is, your second is correct. So we provide the initial patient care. We have parameters where we can cancel the ambulance. We don't have to continue them. Then we can also reduce them down from code 3, red lights and siren, down to code 2. But all transport to the hospital is done by an ambulance. The fire department in this town does not provide medical transportation. There are several fire departments and jurisdictions that do. Biggest one and closest to us is Los Angeles City Fire. LA City Fire has ambulances and they transport patients, but not in this community, not in this city.
Last question, sort of looking in a crystal ball, where do we know what's going to happen next with the county's decisions with respect to the competing fire service and the ambulance service?
So great question. If I could just take a minute to answer that, because I think the community probably would appreciate where it's at. So a couple of months ago, the Board of Supervisors received a recommendation from the Emergency Medical Services Agency and Public Health Department to award a contract to AMR. The Board of Supervisors rejected that, and instead of awarding what was an exclusive operating agreement to one entity, the Board of Supervisors elected to move to what's called a non-exclusive operating agreement, completely changed the parameters of ambulance contracting in our county. They then directed Public Health to come back with a plan of how to award a non-exclusive contract, and the plan was to award potentially 3 different permits. One permit would be for 911 response. One permit would be for interfacility transport, taking Chris from the rehab center to Cottage or to dialysis, or that's what's called IFT, interfacility transport. And the third permit was for what's called CCT, critical care transport, and that involves either a critical care paramedic or a nurse on an ambulance. So on August 10th, the timeline for submitting your request to provide permits closed, and we don't know right now who submitted for what permits. I can tell you that the county fire department did submit for permits. I don't know who meaning company, agents. I don't know anybody else that, that put in a request for a permit. I can surmise, but factually I don't know, and they're keeping that under wraps. And the county public health department has, I think it's 30 to 45 days to review the permits. And then it goes before the Board of Supervisors in October, and the Board of Supervisors will be awarding the contracts to the people, whoever put in for the permit. There has been a question of, is this going to create ambulance wars? Are we going to have 5 different ambulance companies running around in Santa Barbara? The answer to that is no. Their intention is to award 1 911 response permit, 1 IFT permit, and 1 CCT permit. So hypothetically, if Chris's ambulance company, I didn't put in, but if Chris's ambulance company wins the permit, I would have to provide 911 ambulance service in the entire county to include Cuyama, Santa Maria, Guadalupe, Vandenberg. It's the whole enchilada. So the criticism was that it would turn into, that is not what the Board of Supervisors is going for. The Board of Supervisors is saying potentially that we'll award more than 1 permit, but only 1 per permit type. So that's where it's at. We should know by October. And that's about all the information I can share at this point.
How do you plan under those circumstances?
It's a very good question. And, one of the questions that came up was the county fire department purchased 35 ambulances. They had to do that because during the RFP process, they had to be able to prove that they had the ability to begin service. And so they had to purchase those ambulances. It was all done correctly through the county's procurement process. It was all approved. But it just sets the county fire department up, or really any provider. Again, Chris's ambulance company, if I would have bid for it, I would have had to prove that I had the equipment able to take over the contract. So, but you're right, you're talking a very short reflex time between an October potential award of a contract and a March 1st start.
Operations.
So there's a lot of people putting a lot of time in right now.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from commissioners? So I have a few questions. So the response time, 60 seconds processing, so 1 minute, 1 minute turnout, 4 minutes travel. That's
6 minutes.
really impressive. I don't
Yeah.
know that I can get my keys and into my car in 6 minutes. So to be a person in an emergency situation and know that our fire personnel is responding that quickly is wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So 65% of your calls are emergency, rescue and emergency medical services, and 1.85% is fire. I think that would be surprising for a lot of folks, because when we think of fire department, we think of you all putting out fires. I'm just curious, I've asked this before, and I know you can't give an exact number, but I'm just curious, of those 65% emergency and rescue calls, how many would you estimate is related to homelessness?
So we have a what do you call it, box. There's a box that we put in or check if it's homeless. We don't drill down to whether it's medical or whether it's, say, an illegal burn. But overall, in our fire incident reporting, 14% of our calls for service are homeless related. So we don't like to drill down to whether it's a medical or something else, or, people need help for a variety of reasons. And so we can't just say it's a fire or a medical, but overall, the last time we pulled it, it was 13.9%.
Okay. And what are your main challenges with your department, or at least in response to calls for service? And then what kind of support do you need from the commission?
So it's interesting, I was doing an interview earlier today, and they were talking to, the question was about the complexity of the incidents that we respond to. I'm dating myself, but 30 years ago when I started, we had just over 5,000 calls for service a year. We are, as you can see from the data, we are pushing up close to 12,000 calls. As I've said to the commission before, this city is extremely complex to cover fire protection for. Very complex. And I don't think the average citizen realizes what potential we have in this city. But when I start talking about a harbor, boats, a wharf, miles of beach, a railroad, an interstate, a large infrastructure that's aging, a wildland-urban interface, an airport, you start looking at what we face in our fire department every day, there's immense potential. We also have geographic challenges. I had a captain back when I started that used to joke saying, you can't get there from here. And there's a little bit of truth to that, in a sense that you look at a map and you go, oh, well, that's not very far up to the Sheffield Reservoir. Yeah, but to get from downtown to Sheffield Reservoir is a 12 or 14-minute drive. So the number of stations that we have in the city is not only based on call volume, it's also based on geographics, and it's based on what potential we see. I always get a kick out of, there'll be firefighters from the East Coast, and, we'll run into them every once in a while, and they're like, hey, what's up with the surfboard? You guys go surfing on duty? It's like, no, that's not a surfboard, that's a paddle board, and we have certified ocean rescue swimmers. And they're like, what? Why? That's one of our major risks, is that we have an ocean. The types of calls we're going on are becoming more complex. Now, whether that's the vehicles that are being made so well that they're increasingly difficult to disentangle the patient from, to the types of fires that we're seeing. These guys are tired of me, but my daughter lived on the East Coast in New York City, and so I started look at what New York City responds to, and lo and behold, about 2 years ago, they started seeing a massive uptick of lithium-ion battery fires. Well, guess what we're seeing now? We're starting to see these lithium-ion battery fires. They take an incredible amount of water to put out. The synthetics that are in sofas and couches, and how houses are being built more sealed. They can burn undetected for a longer period of time. They burn hotter, they burn faster. It's inherently more complex. And what our folks see on a daily basis is a reflection of really, this is not so much sleepy Santa Barbara by any means. This city has a tremendous amount of risk that we do a great job managing. What do we need? I just appreciate the general support for public safety from the commission, and that goes for police and fire. We function as one. We have an amazing relationship where we work together. Lieutenant Payne's presentation about co-response, I'm cautiously optimistic if the ambulance contract goes the way we hope it's going to go, that there may be some money available for co-response from EMS ambulance transport money. But just general support for public safety is what I always ask for. Our folks do an outstanding job every day. They provide wonderful customer service. You've probably heard me say this. We're busy enough to be extremely competent, but we're not so busy that we lose sight of caring. You can spend a little bit more time with the patients. You can spend a little bit more time helping someone because you don't have, 5 calls in your district waiting for you to. But I would just encourage the commission to continue your great support that you have for the fire department, because it's well appreciated and most appreciated.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Madam Clerk, do we have any public commenters in person or online?
Chair Rodriguez, we do not have any in-person or remote public comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would you mind reading the next agenda item?
Item 9, Santa Barbara Fire Department's evaluation process.
Good almost evening. Like the chief mentioned, my name is Brian Fetterman. I'm the Operations Division Chief for the Fire Department, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our evaluation process. Within the Fire Department, we have several different bargaining groups, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about those. There's the general bargaining unit employees, and I'll identify what positions those are here in a minute, as well as our fire safety employees, the firefighters, the engineers, captains, and fire inspectors, and then there's the managers. And each one of these has a little more complexity to what the overall evaluations look like. The general employees within the fire department, there are 6. Our office specialist, our administrative specialist, the administrative assistant, our public outreach coordinator, and 2 fire service specialists. On the screen before you are examples of what the overall evaluation template looks like. There is a lot to them. These evaluation processes that we do within the fire department provide an extensive amount of information to the employees and are very much a valuable tool. Covering areas such as their duty work assignments, professionalism and responsiveness, compliance to their work, and some mandatory expectations that they have to go through, as well as setting goals for the following year. We incorporate that within the evaluation so that as we're writing these, we can always go back and look at the previous year's evaluation and recognize that in the current evaluation. From the fire safety employees side, there are a lot of folks, over 85, and that is, again, the firefighters, engineers, captains, the different inspectors within the prevention side of the house. And something that's unique too is prior to doing these evaluations, we send out a pre-evaluation to the employee because there may be things that we missed that the employee accomplished over the year, significant calls or deployments that they were on, different programs or things that they participated within the organization, education, leadership training, et cetera, that we want to make sure is captured within the evaluation. It's also important with a lot of movement, and especially recently we've had a lot of promotions in the department, and perhaps that supervisor now working on the evaluation didn't really have all of that time with that employee. So we really want to make sure that something is not missed. This example before you is for a captain, and what's different from the firefighters and engineers is there's more supervisory and management responsibilities and subjects that we identify and provide feedback to the captain on. And then we have the manager's performance contracts. There's 9. There's 5 battalion chiefs within the organization, the fire business manager, the emergency services manager, the division chief, and the fire chief. These templates are much like the previous, especially the captains, again, talking about management and leadership and responsibilities for tasks. But also one thing that is unique with them is that they have, prior to getting your evaluation, we get what's called a contract. And it's not a contract in the sense that we negotiate for something. It's basically a guiding document of expectations from your supervisor for the coming year. And those are outlined. For example, mine has 9 expectations and detailed descriptions from the chief of what I'm supposed to accomplish. And that way I have clear understanding of what I'm going to be evaluated on, and I have a focus and a vision for the year. These are really, there's a lot up there on the screen for sure to show you. I think the most important piece is that we try to make sure everybody is understanding that these evaluations, nothing in the document should ever be surprising to the employee. These supervisors and managers within the organization should always be conducting constant feedback and evaluation of anybody that they're privileged to lead, so that if there is something that needs to be corrected, that it's able to be handled at the lowest level possible. So again, when we're reviewing these at the end of the year, After they're reviewed with the employee, they come to me for a review and then to the chief before they're submitted to human resources. And there should never be anything that the employee is blindsided by. And we really encourage, in the little boxes of specific areas, it's hard to put a lot of detail in. So we really want the supervisors to provide detailed comments and explanation of what the employee has been doing and accomplishing over the year, as well as setting goals for the future. And we use those goals within the training division to identify classes and programs that maybe need to be brought into the organization based on what the feedback is from the supervisors. So very valuable tool and very complex in a lot of ways too. And I'm available for any questions.
Any questions from the commission or comments from the commission? Commissioner Herlinger?
Just a question about, like, the human resources for the fire department is, how does it relate to the human resources department of the city?
So we have a analyst that works within the Human Resources Division that is assigned as our point of contact from the fire department. So if a particular supervisor has a question about something within the eval, they go to that individual. That individual is basically our liaison.
But your system is like self-contained, it's not like a city employee, or is it, you understand what I'm going?
Commissioner Herlinger, I think I understand your
Yeah.
question. So just to back up a little bit, we don't have our own human resources analyst within the fire department.
Okay,
We use the city human resources department, who represents or assists every city department. Your question is outstanding because there are fire departments, depending on their size, that have their own human resources, or they might have their own whole division of, gosh, I heard like Los Angeles County has like 50 people in the fire department human resources division. So we don't have that. We utilize the city. They provide or approve the documents that we use to conduct our evaluations with, and they are very fire specific, but they are approved by Human Resources for relevancy and fairness and all that. The one thing that Chief Fetterman didn't mention is that this is the supervisor's evaluation of the subordinate.
right.
There's ample time for discussion, and there's also ample time for the employee to put comments in, whether positive or negative, and the employee can write a letter, let's say we're way down the road and he forgot, the firefighter forgot, she forgot, oh, I got my bachelor's degree last year and we forgot to put it in the evaluation. That can be added in after. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
It's
And
city
how-
human resources.
Are they up to date? Do you have issues with people completing the evaluations in a timely fashion?
Yeah, we get updates monthly, actually, from Human Resources that help remind all of us, actually, of when they're due, and they're sent out well in advance. My experience has been with 2 months in advance to give enough time to do it. Some supervisors have a lot of subordinates, so it takes a lot of time to do your due diligence in the process. But and if by chance we miss something, we're reminded quickly and we get on it right away.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dozer?
Okay, this is on topic, just a slight deviation.
Perfect.
It's on topic. Your promotions, is that internal or do you do similar to the police department as far as, is there community members on like a promotional panel?
Yeah, a little combination of both. It depends on the level of the position specifically. So recently we did firefighters, entry level, lowest level in the organization. That was fire personnel, some peer and some supervisory. For our captain's test, for our battalion chief test, for the test I took to get this position, very much had both sides involved in the process and had community members that were participating in that. And we just ran through again another promotional with battalion chiefs and captains, and we had 2 sets of panels to include the community as well.
Thank you.
So just to clarify what we typically do, great answer. What we typically do is we run what's called a technical panel, and that would be like the technical aspect of the position, fire captain, battalion chief, and then we have a community panel. Almost like if you think we assess the emergency operations in one panel, and we assess how they would function in a community with the other panel. So it would be difficult to put a community member on a technical panel when we're talking about primary searches, secondary searches, the way we ventilate a building, but excellent on a community panel. The other thing we do is we typically have outside raters in the technical panels. We don't do it ourselves for objectivity. Example, just if we did a battalion chief's test tomorrow, we would have probably a rank above, so a division chief from, say, Santa Barbara County, Ventura City, Oxnard, San Luis Obispo. They provide proctors to us, and we do the same for them. So since I became fire chief, I've sat on 3 fire chief panels for other departments in our area. So very common that we share, and it keeps the process, I think, extremely fair and objective.
Commissioners are often asked to sit in the promotional panel, so if you are asked, I would encourage you to. It's very interesting, and you get to know your departments well. Any other questions from commissioners? Do we have any public comment?
Chair Rodriguez, we do not have any in-person or remote public comments.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So can you read the next item, agenda item?
Item 10, communication and staff communication.
This is a time for commissioners to mention any meetings they attended or to comment on something that is not on today's agenda. Do we have any comments or communications from the commissioners? Nope. I do want to thank Talia for, she will be translating the agenda and minutes into Spanish, so thank you so much for doing that. That's really important for accessibility for all of our community members. I did attend the ice cream with the cop. I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's what I'm calling it, and I think we should do that monthly because that was fun and yum. And I attended the youth CERT, so that's the Certified Emergency Response Training for young people. These young people took their summer, they took a week, I think, of their summer, and they learned life-saving skills, and it was pretty impressive to see a room full of young people that I hope live in my area, so that should I need it, they are available. And that's it for me. Commissioner Hill.
Yeah, this is just a sort of an idea to put out there. I would love to try to understand sort of the flow chart of service from the time someone is directed to the hospital from being incompetent or incapable of being able to act on the street, whether as homeless or most likely substance abuse. What happens next in the pathway? You pointed out that there's a whole series at the hospital, and then there's a lot of other services that can be employed. Sort of getting a global picture of the service that's provided to this person or could be provided to this person, I think would be very helpful because it's very compartmentalized. I'm sure it's all integrated among the members of the organizations, but from the public at large, they don't see the umbrella effect that's really there. So if that could be something we could have presented in some way in one of our future meetings, that would be great.
Would that be a guest that we would invite in, or is that something you would be able to present on?
Chair Rodriguez and Commissioner Hill, I can do absolutely the overview. I could provide the detail, but I think it's always helpful to hear from our community partners and organizations. So I think we would have a couple of speakers from Cottage to our Sobering Center to the organizations that provide a level of service that is offered to individuals when they are admitted to Cottage and receive a level of treatment there.
A follow-up question to that, which I should know by now, but I don't. The recording of these sessions, because that particular one is one I think would be of considerable public interest because people do not really know the full set of services that are available in the community to provide. Is this session recorded or beyond the time that it's available online to watch the whole thing?
Commissioner Hill, all of our meetings are public meetings that are live streamed and then recorded and available after the fact. So they're both available on the Fire and Police Commission website as well as the city's YouTube channel.
Okay.
So that exists for all of our meetings as of the start of this year.
Good, thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions or notes from commissioners? If there are no objections, we can adjourn today's meeting of the Fire and Police Commission at 5:45 PM. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.